In the future, Rebel Blake leads 6 people in a talking spaceship on a desperate mission to destroy the evil Federation's control computer. But he doesn't know Space Commander Travis lies in wait. Plus, one of our heroes dies. Battle of the Network shows. Join Rick Brooks and Mike Kogel as they explore the TV of the 70s and 80s through hand-picked episodes of their favorite and not-so-favorite series.
Welcome to Battle of the Network shows. I'm Mike.
And I'm Rick. Hello, everyone.
And today we're going international again.
Yes.
I haven't done this too much, but this is our third trip to the British Isles.
Let's see. We had Sandbaggers, Doctor Who,
Vince, right?
Blake 7, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And we've been to Canada a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yes, we're going to be talking about Blake 7, a science fiction show from the late 70s, early 80s. I started watching on BritBox maybe a year or so ago, thinking it might be something we would talk about, but then I got into it and recommended it, and we've both, I believe, have seen the entire series.
That's correct.
4 seasons,
13 episodes
a season.
Each. Yes.
Yeah.
52 total.
52. There we go.
Yeah, I remember being excited when BritBox added it because it was something that I had heard of but never seen. Blake 7.
Yeah, I don't know if I had even heard of it. Maybe I had, but it's a lot of fun. It's definitely a darker show than Doctor Who. I mean, Doctor Who's the easy comparison, I think. Also darker than your average Star Trek. Kind of originally conceived as the Dirty Dozen in space, or there's a little bit of a Robin Hood aspect to it too. But very interesting.
Yeah, I think I had heard about it like when I was a kid. I read a lot of comic books, but I also read like fanzines and like fan produced magazines like the Comics Reader and Comics Buyer's Guide. And I think that's where I first read references to like things like Blake 7 because it was a very cult TV show. Yeah. I think Doctor Who had much more of a mainstream presence in the United States, whereas Blake 7, I think, was still kind of more of a fringe thing, like very popular and known in the UK, but over here, kind of more something like, people would talk about, and it was kind of like, what is that, But that's probably where I first heard of it, and yeah, never saw it until it was added to BritBox.
Right. As we're recording this, the first season is coming out on Blu-ray soon. And some sort of remastered thing with dubious-looking new special effects.
Yeah. Looks like it's optional, though.
Oh, option. Oh,
I think they're doing like the Star Trek thing where you can watch them with or without the special effects. That's what they did for Doctor Who, apparently.
Okay. And a lot of special features and stuff. So, that should be good.
Yeah, and though I've seen that first season fairly recently, depending on the supplemental material and the price, I will be getting that box set. I will say, wife of the show, Lori, enjoyed it even more than I did. And as a result, we did plow through all the episodes. And this is one of the few shows that we've talked about in the podcast where Lori has seen all the episodes with me. And maybe the first live action one.
Wow.
Because the other ones were Spider-Woman and the Spider-Man cartoon. I don't think any other one that we both watched like every episode together. But this one we did, and not just to prepare for the podcast, but because we were just like that into it. But I would say without Lori, I don't know if I would have gotten to all 52 episodes in time. But she certainly helped get us across the finish line there. But once we got into it, we were really into it.
Also, it helped having a couple delays before we got to this recording.
That is
session.
True. Yes.
But the concept, again, sort of Dirty Dozen in space, created by Terry Nation, who also wrote the Doctor Who episodes that we talked about, created the Daleks and show Survivors. Is that what it is?
Oh, yeah, like the British show. I think that was one of his.
Yeah. And from what I read in Blake 7, An Oral History of the Classic UK Sci-Fi Series by Joe Nazzaro. Interesting thing in the introduction there. He is an American who, at some point at a convention, met this woman, Sheila Wells, who was one of the makeup artists during the course of the series. And they got along, I guess. But at the time, she was married to Gareth Thomas.
Oh.
At the time of this convention, who played Blake. Later, they got divorced, and Joe Nazzaro, for some reason, moved to England, and he ended up marrying this woman.
Wow.
And they wrote another book together, and then he had all the, the interview material, and he created this oral history from that, where he talks to, I would say, most of the actors and a good deal of the behind the scenes people, including Terry Nation and guy Chris Booter, who was the story editor, and then various producers and directors and whatnot. It's interesting to me, like originally Terry Nation's deal, which was unusual, was to write all 13 episodes of the first season and the second season. And apparently he couldn't quite handle that. And also the other guy, the story editor, says that his way of writing screenplays was it was like the screenplay without dialogue. And then it was the story editor's job to go in and put in the dialogue. And then as
the Marvel method of
kind of like
TV writing.
A little bit, yeah. And then as the series went on, Terry Nation's, he would like write he would kind of maybe write the first and last episodes and another one or something. And then the fourth season, he had moved to California and only was tangentially involved. And seems and is very bitter about what happens in the fourth season.
He seems to have been kind of a strong personality who burns bridges,
yes,
for whatever reason. So
yeah, and like early in the, and I'm sure it's all one interview, he says like, oh, that guy's he's a decent writer and everything, and then later he's like, well, no one else loved the show, like. I loved the show because it was mine, and they didn't love the show, and that's why it ended the way it did. And later, he went on to create his own show, which, by the way, I hear wasn't very successful. To me, it's like I get it. Like if you create something and you see other people do stuff with it that you don't agree with, it would be disappointing. On the other hand, he kind of left.
Yeah.
For big money in California.
Yeah. And people are asking him about it. It's like a cult show that people are really into. So, at some point, at least he's giving answers and not, just he's giving them interesting comments.
Yes.
And speaking his mind. I kind of like that.
I do. Yeah. And, but that at the same time, like, while a lot of the ideas are good, some of them are just, like, especially about the female characters, are just sort of, well, I just thought, she would be the sexy blonde one. That's the whole concept of the Jenna character. Like, that's really not that interesting a character.
Yeah.
You can see why the actress wanted off the show.
That's interesting because, like, I read Liberation, the book by Alan Stevens and Fiona Moore. I think also wrote a book about Battlestar Galactica, the original that I read. And they were involved with some unofficial fan produced like audio work later with Blake 7. And the dominant voice in there's production information and also like a big episode guide with like critical analysis of each episode. It's very interesting reading. And this Alan Stevens, he went and looked at a lot of the original screenplays and stuff to get insight into how the show changed and everything. And draws more from some network sources, but the Chris Bucher,
I don't know.
He is the dominant voice in the narrative, for lack of a better word. I'm not sure if they talked to him directly, but his comments, for whatever reason, whether it was availability or just when the book was written, you hear a lot of, and plus the fact that he was with the show much longer. So you hear a lot about his comments and stuff, and that goes through a lot more. And Terry Nation isn't really heard from directly in the book that I read.
Right. The way they describe his job, because some of the jobs just seem different than over here. Although I have never been clear what a story editor does here either. But his job was to whip all the scripts into shape and to manage, like when they had freelancers, manage those scripts. And so he did a lot of writing on every episode, whether it was a dialogue or just getting it to be in the characters' voices and all that.
But even with that,
and conceptualizing things with I think the first 3 seasons, there was a guy, David Maloney, who was sort of the practical producer. And then the last season was one of the guys who directed a bunch of episodes, took that job over.
I was going to say, even with that, I think you can see a difference when you have, because there are like, they had a roster of people that would write maybe like 1 or 2 scripts, and then they have some other people. But, as with any show, but it does show up in this one, there's a lot of like inconsistencies, an inconsistency of characterization, which, if one guy was doing everything, you wouldn't necessarily have that.
Yeah.
And despite like probably the best efforts, there was stuff inevitably. And that's one of the things that stands out to me actually is like in reading the book, kind of there's just so much stuff that they couldn't control, like whether it be like budgets, support from the network, or lack of support, performers wanting to leave, and things happening at the last minute that really seemed to throw a lot of things into chaos. A lot of times, and it had direct effect on a lot of the episodes.
Right. And also the actors having their opinions.
Yeah.
And he seems very resentful of, not resentful, just he's very much, the writer knows the characters best.
Mm-hmm.
and just do what the script says, and the actors, as actors usually do, especially on something long like this, like, well, I know the character better, and they wouldn't say this, or they would say it this way, or they wouldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And he seems to, I don't know, butted heads is the right word, but disagreed with a lot of those choices and tried to tamp them down sometimes. Like in the later seasons, some, I don't want to call it romantic, sexual tension between a couple of the characters, or subtext that he didn't agree with at all. The actors played it that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a few things that pop up in my reading, things that were not written in the script, that you wouldn't necessarily know. And I do get the impression that, like you said, that he was very like my way, and also like I haven't seen a lot of clips. I'm hoping that to get more, although some of them are not with us, of the actors actually talking about the show.
Yeah.
But just last night I was looking at some of them, and it's funny because like almost invariably they start talking about. It doesn't take long for them to start talking about like their view of the character, or making vague or not so vague allusions to the quality of the scripts or something like that. So it looks to me like I can see things on both sides. I can see like him getting frustrated with them, but I can also see them, probably running into a brick wall right away and seeing that, well, this we wish this were more of a collaborative process.
Yeah, because a lot of times you'll hear writers talk about it, especially a show that goes on, and they say, they work with the because they believe the actors know more, get to know them more because they're playing them, and take ideas from them, or take ideas from their real personalities and incorporate it. And, the characters change over time because of that, which seems to me, not being a filmmaker, but a better way
right
to approach it, that it is collaborative. But, I don't know. A lot of the things I read in that oral history about just the whole system over there seems strange to, like, so it's a BBC show, and like a lot of the like costume and wardrobe and hair and all of those special effects, that they were just on the BBC staff and they would be moved around. So there's not, over the course of a season or a series, it might be the same people, but the next time it would be a totally different group of people.
Yeah.
Just whoever the BBC had assigned there.
And, the story editor isn't necessarily going to be the one who has final say on a lot of this, or should.
Yeah.
And I didn't get a great impression about the fourth series producer. And it seems like, and it's kind of played out. And to me, like the beginning of the fourth season was pretty, it was not nearly as good as what came before. And then the show picked up again. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, though, it seems like if there was one dominant producer voice, like a showrunner, like where you have here, the show might really benefited from somebody who could kind of jump in and have the final say, but also like ensure that there was a collaborative process and there weren't some of these things, and run interference with the BBC. But the system, like you're saying, it sounds like it just didn't really support that kind of system.
And they, especially the first season, they had replaced a cop show. I'm forgetting the name of it, but it's a weird name. It's not Z Cars, which is my other favorite.
Oh yeah,
that one keeps coming up
in like resumes of all kinds of actors. Yes,
but they replaced this cop show and had the same budget, and they people in this thing lament that, because it's a different kind of show that when you're based in the real world, it's not as expensive to do. And here they had to make spaceships and weird creatures sometimes. Although there are not a ton of alien type things, but there are some weird. Weird and hilarious things. And I think much like Doctor Who, and it has that aesthetic, the British film and videotape combination, and studio and outdoor kind of thing. And but they do the best they can with what they have.
To me, like, I don't even mind so much the effect shots.
No.
Even though there's some really like horrible effect shots over the course of the show, but it's I think you see like also the lack of budget manifests itself in like, well, maybe they can't get as many actors or for when the story would warrant some more actors, or like one little thing is like the uniforms, like for better or for worse, like the costume budget goes down and then they're kind of wearing the same thing or whatever with no real reason for it. It just little things, or maybe the sets show up a little bit differently. I mean that kind of stuff to me, I sort of lament that a little bit more than like really bad green screen or something that pops up every now and then. I'm willing to accept that.
Right, like the last season, the special effects are often better. I think they had figured out new ways to do things, and and they reused some shots and things. But I don't know if it's a budget thing, but I think the costumes in the ship and the interior of the ship are much blander.
Yeah,
like by the end of that season, everyone almost most of the main characters are wearing gray jumpsuits all the time. Like, I mean,
think
it's not space pirates, which they have in other seasons. But
it seems like right down to the end of the show, like it was always like an open question whether it would be coming back.
yeah,
And then like for the fourth season, they didn't necessarily think it was coming back. The third season was
right. They
could have
found
been a
out
finale.
the night the BBC announced it when it aired
Yeah.
on the show. Like, it'll be back.
Which was news to everybody involved.
Yes.
And then it was almost the opposite, in other situations where they might have expected they come back. It just seems weird that a show that was as apparently popular as it was not, they didn't lock it down or anything, but it was a different world,
Yeah.
45 years ago.
And the fourth season, at the end of that, they thought they had a chance of coming back.
Yeah. Now let me say something before we get more into this.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say this is something that really surprised me about Blake 7? It's one of the more serialized shows that we've covered because like a lot of the TV we talk about, 70s and 80s TV, it's not nearly as serialized as it is now.
Yeah.
And this, much to my surprise, it does have a lot of serialized elements, like major cast changes, major changes in the structure of the show. So I would say, look, we want to talk about it, and we want you to watch the show if you've never tried it, but be forewarned because it's impossible to talk about the series as a whole without getting into some of this stuff.
Yeah.
As I found out myself, like I found out what happened in the last episode like very early in the watch, and then I had that knowing like something big, major, and even like something major that happens in this episode, I knew ahead of time. So it's hard to avoid. If you go into like a basic Wikipedia or description of the show, you're gonna figure out very easily like stuff that happens. Maybe some people that aren't there the whole show. So just be forewarned.
Yeah, we at least tried not to spoil that last episode.
Yeah, I think we should try to avoid. Yes, I think we should definitely try to avoid that because it's great and it's I think one of the most interesting series finales, and it is a true series finale.
Yeah. But I think like talking about some of the actors who left and stuff is worthwhile because I think especially a couple of them, this episode is an example of why they might have left.
Yeah, and there's varying degrees of how they left. I mean, sometimes it's explained, sometimes it's not. So, sometimes it's more definitive than others.
Yeah.
But there's one particular character I don't know how, but one character who does not return for this fourth season.
Yes.
And the way that's handled is really bizarre.
That's so...
But apparently it was because they didn't know until the last minute.
Yeah.
The actor. So this is the kind of stuff that they had to deal with and work around it. It's very, very difficult. But yeah, it's worth it. I think even if you do know all this stuff, like I did, and I still enjoyed it, and even knowing something major that happens in the finale, I was really captivated.
Yeah,
by
and I think the execution of that is pretty
for sure,
pretty effective.
Yeah.
So yeah, but we're going to talk about an episode from season 2. But I think I was going to talk about the concept about 10 minutes ago. So the series starts out on Earth, somewhere in the future. It is at first it seems like it's some sort of utopia kind of situation, but it's really I guess a dystopia. And we meet this guy Blake. Are they calling him Blake at first? Or what we learn is that he was once a leader of a rebellion, and he had been caught and tried and had his mind wiped. And now he's like part of the government, the Federation. Which, of course, if you think about Star Trek, the Federation is good. Federation is bad here. But over the course of that first episode, he once again, finds those memories and gets his rebellious spirit is back. And then he sees a bunch of people slaughtered. And he gets captured and put on this prison ship to go to some far off place to basically be a slave. And he meets some other ne'er-do-wells on the ship, and then that ship encounters this alien vessel, the Liberator, what they end up calling the Liberator, and he and this group liberate themselves by stealing the Liberator.
Yes.
And then they go off and they're sort of this pirates / rebels, and he's their lead, their idealistic leader, and the crew is made up of people with various skills and personalities and loyalties to his ideas are varying. So you end up with Avon, who's sort of the second in command, and he's much more about himself. And he was a sort of computer expert criminal, very intelligent, very cold, and probably the best character on the show. And then there's Villa, who is a slightly cowardly safecracker, but he's smarter than people give him credit for. And he's also a bit of a drunkard. Jenna, who I believe was supposed to be a pirate and a skilled pilot, and mostly just becomes a...
There's some episodes which I like, where they actually make reference to her skills as a pilot.
Yeah.
Because the Liberator is such like an advanced ship with the technology,
right.
It seems like it would render those skills less essential.
Yes.
But they do find ways to do that, which I like. And it seems like the piracy, like many of the characteristics of the main crew, that's sanded down a little bit.
Yeah.
They don't make reference to that after the beginning.
Yeah, and a lot of what she's there to do is be sort of a sidekick to Blake, I think, or a vaguely romantic interest. But
She's kind of like the most sensible.
yes.
Maybe arguably the most sensible one, depending on what you think about Blake. But yeah, that's kind of how it is. It's kind of like a sounding board and someone else to be sort of a voice of reason sometimes, I think.
And then there's Gan, who is the big guy.
Played by Gordon Jump.
But yes, Blake.
No, not played by Gordon Jump.
Yeah. And he's got a chip in his head because he violently, did he kill his wife or
he killed somebody who had sexually assaulted his wife.
Oh, right.
I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So he's got a limiter.
An inhibitor chip, yeah. And then along the way they pick up Callie, who is an Oron, or some sort of offshoot of humanity that has psychic abilities, and later you find out they're clones.
Yes, and that's one thing that's kind of weird about the show is like her telepathy and psychic abilities sort of come and go.
Yeah.
They don't always remember that.
And they are kind of like she can, with regular humans, she can send messages, but they can't talk to her, back to her.
Yeah.
With Orons, they can communicate. And it also, as with psychics, makes her sometimes susceptible to outside attacks.
Yes, sometimes.
Sometimes.
For a while, it seems like every other episode,
Yeah.
she's, taken over or otherwise incapacitated by somebody.
Right.
I will say that I think, like, when they there's some episodes where they use her psychic abilities very effectively.
Yeah.
And it's a useful tool. And then there's some other ones where it's like, oh, this would be a good place to use that, if you had it. So
right.
that kind of thing.
But she was also involved in rebellions and stuff, and so she's got military training.
She's one of the most aggressive in the crew. Like, whenever they want action or like kind of more militaristic things, she's usually the one to volunteer for it.
Yeah. You might have been counting along, and that's
five.
Wait,
There's
well,
five.
and Blake.
Five, counting, Blake.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So who's number 7?
Yeah.
Well, the ship.
Yes. Okay, yeah.
With its computer mind, Zen.
Yeah.
And then there's also another computer. Unfortunately, we don't see Orak. He gets mentioned in this episode. He's definitely a male personality.
And apparently, that's one of the things where, because of script rewrites, they have a reference to him, but he's not in it, apparently, because they moved episodes around.
Okay.
So, because it would make sense, I think in this particular episode, it could have been useful. Instead, they just reference him.
Yeah. So, and they find him near the end of the first season. He is a clear plastic box with some lights and wires.
Yes.
But he has a lot of attitude.
Yes. And you know what else he has? My favorite thing, a remote control, basically.
Yes.
A clicker.
A click. Right. And to turn them off, they just take that. They can take it off.
Yes. And throughout, there's lots of tense situations in the show, but what always causes tension for me is the fear that they will lose that clicker.
Yeah.
And it seems like apparently, like, especially like in the later seasons, like Avon's just carrying it around with him a lot.
I think he is, yeah.
But man, there's times it's like, I know how hard it is to lose that kind of thing. And just take better care of this. It's almost like they should have like a brick around it or something.
Yeah, they definitely should have. The third season, they're on some planet that has like this weird duplicator machine.
Yeah.
They should have duplicated. They should have duplicated Orak.
Yeah. That's a good point.
What were they thinking? Because it actually does. So one of the things the ship came with is like a teleport, much like Star Trek, except for they have to wear these bracelets, which they quite often are just like leaving behind.
Yes. They slide off.
And then behind the scenes, people were walking off with those things all the time. So the crew had to make them all the time.
Oh man, that's interesting.
But on the duplicator one episode, that I enjoyed that. They were like, "Oh, let's make some more teleport bracelets. Yeah. We're almost out."
That was interesting, right? Because when they first see them, they got like a ton of them. And there is an episode that explains where the ship came from.
Right.
But after that, which is interesting because after that, they don't really come back to that very much.
The ship is way more sophisticated than anything else out there.
It's like faster than anything else.
Faster. It's got the teleport, which is they do use to great effect, I think.
It has offensive capabilities. And I like the idea of having a physical device to tether them that they need.
Yeah.
It's good story, but I kind of like that too. And there's some explanations as to the teleporter. It seems like they thought that through fairly well.
Yeah. And you mentioned them flying the ship. And like in the early episodes, well, the ship requires 7 people to fly it.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. It doesn't require anyone.
Yeah.
It just requires Zen.
Yeah. You do wonder sometimes what they're all doing at these like these stations, like, and of course every now and then you'll see their screens, which kind of primitive looking designs, but it's like, what do you really need for it?
Yeah.
I guess sometimes they'll say that they switch to manual for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And then
a lot of times Zen.
Yeah.
8 by standard.
Yeah. And then later they get, another pilot
Uh-huh.
that comes in handy, I guess. But that's down the road. But so ORAC, yes. So
Yeah.
ORAC is like tied into every can access any computer.
Yeah.
And why is it? It's because like there's a certain type of chip, and because all computers require this chip,
Right.
ORAC can access any computer that depends on the same technology
Yeah.
and get all kinds of information. That's how they get intelligence.
Yes, and process it, and he's he's a very snooty computer.
Yes, he is, especially at the beginning.
Yeah, and he's the person who made him also had a lot of attitude, so he has the same attitude as his inventor.
Right, and ORAC becomes like a coveted.
Yes.
A coveted member of the crew, but is like as the crew becomes more notorious, ORAC is also like seen as a prize, for obvious reasons.
And that's one thing I like is that there's clearly a lot of stuff happening between episodes.
Yeah.
And they're gaining this reputation around the galaxy. Mm-hmm. Yes, and rumors of ORAC and rumors of them, and
yeah.
And then in the final season, they have a different ship for reasons, and there's a different computer, which unfortunately is named Slave.
Yeah.
So they all have voices, all done by the same actor, and they all make me laugh.
And he's great. And
because he's a little bit like the robot in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He's a little. I mean, he's called Slave. He's got some self-esteem issues.
Yeah, he's so deferential.
Yeah. I'm sorry, sir.
Just and he hesitates to like interrupt them.
Yeah.
And he apologizes for like jumping in, even if like they're under attack or something. He apologizes before he gives the information.
Yeah. My programming won't allow me to do that.
Yeah, you know what? While I'm thinking of it too, like of all the cast changes, I almost felt most acutely the absence of the Liberator, you know? Like in the last season, it's like, oh man, I kind of wish I missed the Liberator.
It just their home.
And Zen.
Yeah.
Because, Zen's part of the Liberator.
Yeah. And Zen's got a little latitude too, but not as much. Confirmed.
Yes. I like when Zen goes, information.
Yeah.
And when he jumps in with something and he says information first. I'm going to start doing that more often.
Okay.
But yeah, and I think Zen seems a little bit more like Zen changes maybe slightly. I mean, Zen actually gets a better send off than many of the other most of the characters in the show, right?
Yeah.
But the presence of ORAC makes Zen seem a little bit more like
superfluous,
amiable, or just,
okay.
Zen seems more like snooty. But then when Zen seems a little snooty at first to me, and then when ORAC comes along, it's like, oh, Zen's nothing compared to ORAC.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to. Yes.
And as we mentioned, they're dealing with the Federation, and quite often they're being pursued by Space Commander Travis.
Yes, Space Commander Travis. I love that name. It's great.
Yeah, played by Patrick Simmons.
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah. Well, actually, played by two different actors in the first two seasons, and he many years prior to this had tangled with Blake and I believe lost an arm and an eye. So he has a robot hand and he's an eye patch.
Yeah.
And he's like the guy in The Fugitive, pursuing him at all costs.
Yeah, and the Travis we see in this episode or in this season is a lot different than the other. I mean, they're different actors, and it actually comes off as really different characterizations, which is kind of cool. I kind of like
that. I mean, I kind of think they should have just come up with a new character.
Yeah.
And some in that book, some of the actors think maybe that would have been a better idea. That it's just difficult to follow in someone's footsteps who's
it's jarring.
A very different actor.
Yes, it is jarring because he's physically different, and like the voice, like everything about it is different.
Yeah, like the first guy is kind of rough.
Yeah.
And this guy, although apparently it was kind of macho too, but it's like a Clive Owen era.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I kind of thought he sort of reminded me of of Brian Ferry for some reason, a little bit. But he's it's different. I don't want to say better or worse.
No.
But yeah, it is different.
Yeah.
I will say this: it breathes some new life into the character and gives a little bit different perspective. Whereas Servalan, we see through the whole show,
Supreme Commander Servalan,
who's
Supreme Commander, I believe, of the military.
Yes, I beg your pardon.
Yes,
but I don't know. They don't. The way they handle that character is one of my biggest problems with the show, and we can get to that later. But.
Yeah. So she seems to be the head of the military. There are people above her, at least in the first two seasons, and then the third season is a little ambiguous.
Yeah, you're right. Like in this episode, there's a direct reference to her having to pull strings and like clear stuff to get things done. She's not like omnipotent.
Yeah, but she's not your typical military leader in that she's swanning around in couture dresses and jaunty hats. And
Yes, it's particularly unfortunate in this episode.
the-
I think her wardrobe becomes a little bit more standardized at some point, I think.
Yeah.
But in this one, yeah, it's really bizarre.
but always in the first few seasons, it's always white, and then it changes to black. And in the I think in the third season, but and she's got short hair, and I saw a reference in Wikipedia to the actress's obituary, talking about how many sexual awakenings this character caused in boys in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, and she's often wearing, certain types of outfits,
Yes.
and her, her manner
Yes, she and
is a certain way.
I think I said this months ago. She chews on every line as if it's a delicious morsel.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's something too that goes on. Kind of going back and watching this episode. For one thing, I mean, her makeup is more subtle.
Yes.
Like the makeup gets more intense, and I think she gets more and more campy as the show goes on too.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's interesting going back and watching this, where it's still a little bit more of a different performance. And I'm not criticizing it, but like I think she's great and she's very entertaining, and I can see why the show wanted to build around her so much.
Right.
I guess in one season she had health issues.
Okay.
So her availability was limited, which affected a lot of things they could do story-wise, and they didn't know when she'd be available.
I see. Because the third season, she's pretty much a regular cast member.
Yeah.
And then the fourth season,
I think
she's in maybe about half the episodes
Yeah.
of the fourth season.
I think the beginning of the fourth season, it was like touch and go, and so it was like a surprise to them, and so some of the weirder aspects of her character are partly because they didn't know until the last minute that she would be able to be participate.
Okay.
So
Yeah, and I know. Like, you feel like they overused her.
I do like.
Especially, and I think the third season is the worst at
Well, there's a great example of it in this of what I'm talking about in this episode. But there's a line of dialogue that makes you think. But here's my thing: is they clearly wanted like a nemesis for everybody, but it's just not practical for somebody of her stature to be actually physically going around and being like in every episode going down and showing up and like it's okay for her to set a trap, but then for her to physically be there and like laugh at them at the end is just not realistic at all.
Yeah.
Especially when you're going through space, it's not like you're on one planet.
Right.
So what I would have done is have her be like in some kind of like command center and just have her like fuming and like talking to them on vid screens or whatever.
Yeah.
And occasionally interacting with them in person. That would make it more special. Whereas to me, as the show goes on, it becomes almost it's just ridiculous that she is there so often. Like
Yes.
there were times where like I'm expecting her to like, oh, they're going to take off the helmet and it's going to be Servalan. And a lot of times it turns out to be the case. I think they way overuse.
Or she steps out of the shadows and
Yes.
Avon's Sutherland.
Yes. Yeah. I think they should have been a little bit more judicious to how they used it.
Well, and one of the people, the producer on the last season, talks about that they had already that they had the feeling that it was becoming too Tom and Jerry or Sheriff of Nottingham, where if she's you're building her up to be this effective, powerful, threatening person, but she keeps losing.
Right.
The something would have had to change if they had done a fifth season.
Right.
Like the health thing didn't come up in there, I don't think, but some of her reduced presence in the fourth season was because of that too.
Yeah.
They felt like we're overusing her.
Yeah. And at this point in the episode we're going to talk about, it makes more sense for her to keep losing because she can blame it on Travis.
Yes.
But once those two are kind of separated, it makes less sense. And that's kind of, I guess, a story reason why she's personally doing all this. But even so, there's a lot of episodes where it's both Servalan and Travis. It's like, delegate a little bit more. Even if you do have these idiots, that's kind of what I'm saying. And Travis, it's kind of the same way with him for a while. But he has more of an excuse because, like, with circumstances, what happened to his character, it's more reasonable for him to be being a maverick and just running around pursuing, one person.
And he's been given that assignment.
Yes. As opposed to, somebody who's got administrative duties and
Yeah. She doesn't do any paperwork. Come on. She has mutoids to do paperwork for her.
Which is the mutoids, which was something else that kind of gets like phased out as the series goes on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The mutoids, yeah. They're so weird.
Yes,
I don't know they're people wearing rubber wigs.
Like like a lot of Travis's crew are these female characters called mutoids, and I guess they do a lot of the grunt work.
Right, and they just
Now
bizarre.
I'll give Servalan and Travis credit for not delegating in the sense that like, hey, they don't ask people to do anything that they wouldn't do for the most part.
That's right.
Like they're getting their hands dirty.
Yeah. Yep.
Maybe even more so than on the Liberator, where a lot of times they ask Villa to do stuff that they have no intention of doing.
Yeah. Poor fella.
And actually, maybe this would be a good time to mention this because we're talking about a second season episode. But I think that the first season, which was more like Terry Nation involved, it's a lot more dark, especially that first episode. I mean, like just little things in that the whole dystopian future. It's more tangible. And they do kind of, like I said, they sand down a lot of those rough edges. I think I read in the book that there was a dictate to use less violence, and the violence is toned down. Some of the criminal aspects of the characters, like Gan, they're toned down, and really it becomes like there's still some dark episodes, but the whole sense of oppression is not as tangible as is in the first season. And I think that's another thing with this stuff with Servalan, like having it be like you said, like a Tom and Jerry or something. It makes it more of like a personal thing, and like them going as opposed to like in the early episodes where it's like the Federation, it's so oppressive. And I think they do get back to that sense by the end of the series and the way they end it. You feel more like, okay, it's just the weight of the Federation, which I thought was the original intent of the show. And I do think they get away from that by emphasizing like the conflict and them playing cat and mouse with Servalan. Whereas really like the whole thing where it started was like, this is the Federation and it's this brutal regime that's oppressing everybody. And it's systemic. It's not just one individual.
Right. So should we start talking about the episode?
Yeah, I think we should. I think there's some other stuff we can probably get into as we get into
sure,
it. There's a lot going on in this episode.
Yes.
Actually,
what was airing?
I can't tell you what was on the BBC.
Right.
And I can't tell you what was on ITV or Channel 4.
Right.
But I can tell you what was going on American telly.
Okay.
Because we know that this series, or Series B, I noticed a lot of...
Series B.
Not just Season 2, Series B.
Right.
So there's A, B, C, and D. Episode 5, Pressure Point is what it's called. It premiered February 6, 1979, from 8:10 to 9 p.m. Don't you love that?
Yeah. Wonder what did they show all their commercials beforehand?
I think
they have commercials.
Yeah. Well, so they would have something like 7:40 to 8:10, probably like a half hour, comedy before that or something. Tonight, comedy on the BBC. Yes.
Blake 7.
Yeah. It's a night of comedy and science fiction on BBC tonight.
So one of Rick's cats is sitting here, Teddy, and right as you delivered that line, Teddy looked and closed one eye. I don't know about this joke.
Teddy, what do you think about that? He's not sure. Well, he's seen many of the episodes too.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yes. Yeah. So here's stateside. It's not terribly interesting. NBC had one thing on the 1976 movie 2 Minute Warning, football, like terrorism and football, with Charlton Heston and I think David Jansen, and that was all they had. So I guess they didn't edit it. They showed it like in a 3-hour time.
Give us a 2-minute warning. Or was that Kirk Douglas? It was neither. I hope someone said 2-minute warning in that.
Yeah. Okay, CBS had a special, apparently written and directed by Richard Schickel, film historian, called Horror Show, tribute to like horror movies and classic horror movies, hosted by Anthony Perkins. ABC, okay, this is classic ABC Tuesday night. Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Three's Company, Taxi, Starsky and Hutch.
Yeah.
There you go.
And what was the transmission date again?
February 6th.
February 6th.
1979. So, yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Right during the February sweeps, maybe here.
As we said, it's Pressure Point, 5th episode of Series 2. And it was written by Terry Nation. And I forget who directed it, but it might have been a director people didn't like.
Maybe. It wasn't Richard Schickel. He did a Horror Show.
Yeah. I wonder what Richard Schickel thought of Blake 7.
Yeah. And it wasn't Rod Holcomb. I can tell you that.
No. I'm going to find it. So usually, some of the production things I read, they usually have 3 or 4 directors during the season who would direct multiple episodes. The other thing they did was a lot of block shooting where they would go and shoot all of the outdoor sequences for multiple episodes and then come back and do the studio stuff. So quite often the actors were doing parts from multiple episodes.
I'll bet. Okay. Information. The director, I believe, was George Spenton Foster.
Yes, I think people were not...
What a great British name, though.
We're not pleased with him. Certainly not the gentleman playing Travis, Space Commander Travis. I love that, too, because a lot of these names, and not just the regular characters, but guest characters, it'll be a name that, sounds like something you've heard, and then you see it in the credits, and it's spelled some completely bizarre way.
Right.
Even Villa only has 1 L.
Yeah.
Why? I don't know.
Right. That's right.
But Space Commander Travis, that's
Yeah.
as clear as cowboy as it gets.
And they do load it up throughout the course of the series with some good Star Wars type names where it's just a couple of consonants randomly put together with one vowel. So you get space names.
Yes. So it opens with a couple soldiers on a planet we later learn is Earth, and they're on the edge of somewhere called the Forbidden Zone. There's no boundary, there aren't any fences or anything. The only thing we see at first, we see a little camera or sensor, as they would say on Star Trek, and then like a house with a thatched roof. And we go inside there, and there are the mutoids and Space Commander Travis and Servalan, and they're watching this stuff on a camera. Servalan is wearing a jaunty hat, a white hat with her almost like a horse riding kind of.
It does
it's not a
look like
dress.
that, yeah.
A lot of times she's in these dresses or gowns.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So they mentioned that these are some of Kasabi's men. We don't know who Kasabi is yet, but really what they're doing is they're waiting for Blake to show up. Whatever is going on, they think this will bring him there.
Yeah, and right away, or pretty early in this episode, you see Servalan and Travis bicker a little bit, or just some, they've got kind of contentious relationship.
Yes, they've been waiting for 18 days.
Okay, yeah, right there.
Yes.
Why is she on this planet for 18 days?
Right. Yeah. I mean, if it is Earth, she should be going back and forth.
At least in this spot, yeah.
Yeah.
They make it sound like they've been waiting here in this, like, yeah.
Right. Yes. In Shakespeare's childhood home.
Yeah.
And then they cut back to the soldiers, and there's like a bunker and this white tower, and they mention that it might be where control is. I don't know what that is yet, but they kind of start moving forward, and they both get stuck to the ground, and then they blow up real good.
Yeah, sure do.
So then we cut to the Liberator, again, their ship, and Zen explains to Blake that they're 3 hours to teleport range, and the others are like, teleport range? Where are we going?
Yeah.
And Blake reveals that it's Earth, but he hadn't told anyone. This is a bit of a pattern with Blake.
Yes.
He's got plans. He doesn't entirely trust. They're not the most trustworthy lot.
Right.
Or he's trying, in this case, he's sort of trying to protect them, I guess, or doesn't want to be talked down from his...
Yeah, to me, it comes off a lot of times as, not so much this time, but it comes off as kind of some arrogance and him just, like, not wanting them to know and just telling them the last minute, as opposed to, like, yeah, it comes off a little bit more megalomaniacal. Mm-hmm. It's interesting.
And he was more misleading them.
Yes.
He told them they were skirting Earth, not going to Earth. But of course, Avon, speaking of megalomaniacal and plans within plans, he already figured it out.
Yes.
You must have been up to something. And he wants to hit at the heart of the Federation, control, which is the nerve center. It's where all the computers that control the entire Federation are based. And he wants to go destroy that.
Imagine what that would do to the Federation.
Yeah. Chaos.
Yes.
Callie seems already on board with whatever this... She also seems to maybe know a little bit. Maybe she was using her psychic ability.
Or maybe Blake, seeing more of a kindred spirit, has given her more information than the rest of them.
Right, which makes you think she'll be really involved.
That's a reasonable expectation now that you mention it, yes.
But everyone else is a little bit skeptical. But with Orak's help, Blake knows more than anyone outside the Federation's top echelon.
Yeah.
And Avon slow claps him.
Yeah. That is a great moment.
Yes.
Avon's great, and again, after watching some of the later episodes, it's fun to go back and say, yes, Avon always had that acidic delivery.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different now, partly because of circumstances and where Avon's character is later. But yeah, Avon's great, and you just have to see Paul Darrow.
Yes.
The actor is great, and just the way he delivers the lines, it's a riot.
Yeah. But, Blake is like, I don't want to involve any of you. You can just, I'll just teleport down there. He's already been in touch with Kasabi, the resistance leader.
I think Blake says, I think I can destroy it. And I kind of noted him saying I, like kind of the I thing, which we'll come to later. And there's a lot more intensity in Blake. Like in this episode, he's particularly intense, which is interesting. But yeah.
Yeah. So Kasabi is a middle-aged woman, and she's got a girl, like a teenage girl with her. And they're waiting for these guys that died to come back so that they can contact Blake about the rendezvous. And they've cameras spying on them, and then we see that they're in the woods on a little hill, Servalan's standing up there. And then they get surrounded, and these Federation soldiers shoot pretty much everyone. And I was like, oh, maybe they're stunned or something, but pretty much kill everyone.
Yeah.
Except for Kasabi, and Servalan says something about get the girl. Mm-hmm. So this is not a good sign. And back on the Liberator, most of the crew has decided that they want to go with Blake after all. And but they want to deal with him. If it seems like it's going south, that they'll pull out. Avon, who's not with them, but he says he was always going to go. Not because he necessarily believes in the mission so much as he believes he's necessary because he's a computer expert. And if it all works out, he'll get what he wants, which is the Liberator. And because Blake will no doubt need to stay behind and become a leader for the resistance. And he does it marked by, one day.
He says, "You
come." And Blake is even all like, just be patient.
Yeah, and Avon's like, "You'll have no choice," and it's inevitable. And I really like this scene, the conversation between the two, because Blake, like, in many of his interactions with Avon around this, it's almost like that bemusement,
Yeah.
like he's not surprised by any of it, just
Right.
like Avon isn't surprised by him. But he's like, I like the way he plays the scenes very much. But
Yeah, they're great. The characters are a great pair because they're
Yeah.
they're kind of equals.
yeah,
They're very different. Blake is an ideologue, and Avon is the opposite.
yeah,
He's maybe, I don't want to say, I guess he's practical, whereas Blake is mostly motivated by outer interest, although clearly there's an arrogance too. And Avon is mostly motivated by self-interest. But if altruism can help his cause, he's fine with it.
I mean, like you said, he's probably the best character. And
Yeah.
this sort of like the conflict between some of these issues and how Avon's character plays out is one of the fascinating things to watch over the course of the series. And it's not really, there's always this ambiguity that
Yes.
you don't really get, like, but in a good way. I mean, sometimes there's a few things that I question here and there where and his character does sort of change a little bit, but and he's always interesting to watch.
Yes. And I think by the last season, I guess the concept was that over the course of the season, he's losing his mind.
Yes, and I think that's stronger in some episodes than it is in others.
Yeah.
But it definitely seems that way. And some of his reactions to things. The Liberation book mentions at one point, almost it's kind of a casual comment, but I thought it was interesting. It says that, like, in this scene, I forget what it was, but like it says Darrow does a technique that he does a lot, which he'll stand impassively and reveal little emotion on his face so that the viewer, like, reads into what they want, which is like kind of a way, apparently, the idea being that it makes the characters more ambiguous a little bit. And he says it was a deliberate choice to play it like that.
Right.
So Darrow knew what he was doing and did that on purpose a lot of times, which is interesting.
Yes. And most of these actors, of course, England, so they're all, like, stage trained. Paul Darrow, when he was in whichever school he went, RADA or whatever, one point was roommates with Ian McShane and John Hurt.
Wow.
Or flatmates, I should say.
Yes.
I think Jacqueline Pierce was at the same school at the same time. So, they're all good actors and bringing those sorts of things. And he had played the Sheriff of Nottingham not too long, which seems appropriate somehow.
Yeah, I got to see that.
So, back on Earth, Servalan is confronting Kasabi, and the mutoids reveal that they did kill most of the people, but Kasabi is not. She's not going to reveal anything. And she said, "Oh, did we already have the thing too?" That already came up, right? Where Kasabi had once been a teacher at, like, the Federation Military Academy or something, and Servalan had been her student, and it turns out he had turned her in for being a traitor.
Yeah.
And teaching treachery.
And Servalan's quite proud of this.
Yes. Right. Travis only knows that someone had, and Servalan's. Yeah, and he says something like, "Whoever did that was quite good." And, yes, I was.
Yeah.
So they have this history, and Kasabi says something that, you were always spoiled, and I told them you were unfit for command. On the Liberator now, they're waiting for the signal. It hasn't come when it should have. Villa is already. He's like, "Oh, well, let's just go." Gan is surprisingly open to waiting. He's like, give it a shot.
Yeah.
And then they're questioning Kasabi on Earth, and they're using some sort of drug.
Yeah, one thing I didn't like about this scene is Servalan's menace is hampered by the ridiculous hat she's wearing. Like, you'd think she would at least have taken off the hat for the interrogation part of this.
Right, yeah.
But no, she leaves it on.
Yeah.
Which makes it kind of funny, but her, like, leaning in and being intimidating.
Yeah, it's like something you might wear to, I don't know, a garden party or something.
Perfect, yes. A fete.
A fete,
a church fete.
And she wants to give her more of the drug, or she does. Travis warns against that it could kill her. But they did recover a homing beacon, but it might need some sort of code.
Yeah, Travis is pretty clever in this. I mean, because
This is a better outing for him, I think.
he comes off like, for one thing, like he's actually not nearly as ruthless as she is.
Yeah.
In this part, and he's kind of like, looking over, it's like, it might need some kind of sequence, and he's much more restrained for someone as obsessive, who's helped lay the groundwork, and the moment's almost here, but he's surprisingly a lot more rational.
Yeah. So once they give her more of the drug, she does finally give up two things. One, where the rendezvous is supposed to be, and two, the code that they
Sequence for the
sequence. Yes. And then Servalan gives her more drug, and she dies. But I believe she says something nasty to Servalan on her way out. I don't remember what. No.
Well, is that where she says something like, "I wish I could have helped you"?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which seems almost meaner than the unfit for command.
Yeah, I mean, she's pretty defiant to the end.
Yeah.
We'll say that. Yeah, and Servalan, she doesn't keep people around once. The phrase "outlive their usefulness" comes in many times with Servalan through it. Blake 7.
On the ship, Blake is ready to. He's finally ready to pull out, and of course, right then the signal comes in, and so he wants to get teleported to a nearby spot. So they've worked out some plan while in between scenes, and he'll scout things out, and then Gan will join him. So that's what happens. He gets the all clear. Gan joins him, and then they start a countdown on the ship for the second part of the plan. And he and Gan go to the spot, which is the ruins of a church. And I like Blake had to explain what a church was. It was like a nice bit of sci-fi there.
Interesting, yes.
It's a place where people used to go to worship.
Yeah.
And Gan leans against like a post, and there's some blood on it. So he's like, well, someone's been here. But they go inside. There's building left, and the girl is lying on the floor there. And she mutters, no, and then faints. So she's still alive, and Gan has some medical stuff, high-tech medical stuff, and helps out. Well, on the ship, Avon is concerned or suspicious that something's not right.
Yeah. I like it. He asks several times, what about Kasabi?
Yeah.
And Blake, does not
answer. Yes, I know. He keeps just asking another question.
Like, even Villa picks up on it and comments on it. It's so, obvious that Blake is concealing something.
Right. And they revive the girl, and what was her? Veron?
Veron. Yeah, Veron, Veron, Veron. Veron.
So she's Kasabi's daughter, and she says that everyone died, and she hid, and she was the one that gave the signal, which is a signal to us that if we didn't already trust her, we probably can't. Now Gan is ready to, he's like, this is no good. But Blake gives a little speech, and he's like, well, okay.
That's why he's such a great leader.
Yes.
With a mere few words, he can change minds, I guess.
That's right. So the next part of the plan is that Avon and Villa will teleport into the Forbidden Zone for 5 minutes to get the lay of the land, and then they'll get teleported to where Blake and Gan are. Villa, of course, doesn't want to go. He does. And so they do it, and they get basically in the same place where those guys died. And then we see that there's like this grid of, I don't know, or a mesh or whatever. These connected wires, and Avon does a little experiment and snips one of them, and it self-repairs in 8 seconds.
Yeah, they look like kind of like Hot Wheels tracks.
They do. And then they get teleported out right before
it's pretty cool.
Up. Yeah,
I like the explosions in this episode. By the way, I thought they were pretty good. Yeah,
and I like that was a good use of the teleport.
Yes,
get them out of there.
Yeah, just in the nick of time.
Yes. By the way, Callie and Jenna are on the ship operating the teleport.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've been alluding to this, but they don't get a lot else to do this episode.
And apparently other episodes, I guess, right? There were two that were pretty vocal about their lack of.
Yes.
And it's kind of funny because there's not really truly 7 people, but I remember seeing several references to this that and later on certain decisions are made because, or maybe they were going to add somebody else, but it's like, well, we have enough characters to write for. Apparently, the writers really had problems keeping everybody happy and finding enough stuff to do for the humans.
Right. Yeah.
So, which
maybe if you didn't have the villain in every episode.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and I think the actress Sally Knivet playing Jenna was fairly new to things, and so she didn't always know how to speak up for herself.
Interesting.
But she left after this season because she just didn't have much to do, and was expected to be pretty.
Yeah, I mean, and it kind of goes like, I think early in the first season, she sort of becomes, there's a point she becomes like more glam as the series goes on.
Yeah.
And it seems like they're making an effort to give her more things to wear, and just the hair is a little bit more like Farrah, more feathered, and
I think she's wearing a dress in this episode.
Yeah, and that's, in a little bit, she's going to be carrying a purse with her.
That's right.
Which for no apparent reason.
I think it is the teleport bracelets in it. That was my. I'm glad you noticed that too.
Well, I didn't notice it the first time, to be
Did
honest.
Lori notice?
But then later on in the series, we see a character, Dana,
Yeah.
who seems to have a knack for carrying like explosive devices on her person somewhere.
Yes.
So she doesn't need a purse, is all
No.
I'm saying. So maybe Jenna could have developed that skill, but yes,
Yeah.
it looks a little odd just seeing her
Right.
carrying a conventional like handbag around
Yeah.
her shoulder.
And there, like a wardrobe, one of the costume designers talking about dressing the two women, and that for some reason she was supposed to be sexy and Callie was, more this fighter, but there were a lot of caftans for Callie. Like what? What does that have to do with? And some of these, one of the costume designers later designed the costumes for Willow.
Wow.
But I don't know. Reading that they felt underused, I'm like, yeah.
I think was it Lori? I think had seen something that somebody made a comment that they always wanted to wear each other's like
Right,
Jenna
yeah.
wanted to wear the stuff that Callie was wearing, and Callie was always like envious of what Jenna got to wear, which
And
must have been kind of a problem.
I think this costume designer was, well, she just didn't have the kind of body for that or something.
Which I'm sure she didn't want to hear.
No. And there, I don't remember too many episodes like this, but I guess in the writing there was a little bit of like they don't like each other, and they both felt like that was a cliche.
Yeah.
But also here was a missed opportunity to have two women who were friends.
Quick note here: later on in the series, we see Dana and Sulin, two
Right.
different female characters, and it takes a while, especially to develop the Sulin character.
Yeah.
But Lori and I were talking actually about how we liked, it was refreshing that Dana and Sulin seemed like friends by the end of the series.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's in stark contrast to the relationship with the other, Callie and Jenna, who there seemed to be some kind of underlying tension in a lot of their interactions together, as you're saying. So yes, we noticed that
And
too.
and Dana and Sulin is kind of weird too because they're almost the same character in a way. I mean, they're both good with weapons.
Yeah, I think later they do find a way to. It's almost at Dana's expense. It seems like they give Dana less to do, but they do give Sulin more to do and have her seem more like a strategist as opposed to just a marksman.
Right.
So it's really like it seems like one thing Lori and I thought were after watching the whole series was like we would have liked to have seen more of the Sulin character, and it might sound like sacrilege, but she's a more interesting character than Jenna by the end of the series. There's the potential there that like I wish maybe they could have done this with Jenna, but nothing against the performers or whatever, but the Sulin character to us was much more interesting than Jenna. And it's like, okay, they finally figured out how to do this with what could have been the quote, the token blonde character, and they made her be somebody with a lot of potential that they just didn't have a lot of time to get to with her, but could have been.
Yeah. So the guys are in the church now with Blake and Gan, and Gan recaps what happened, and then they start working on a plan on the floor, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, I like that too.
And while they're doing that, the girl wanders off.
Yeah, she wants to go out. She has some, Gan is particularly tender in this episode. To like, he's like kind of cradling her earlier, and he's saying like, "No, be careful. You can't take any risks," which.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's getting a lot to do here.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Yeah.
But they're kind of playing up the gentle giant aspect of his like more the little John or whatever.
Oh, yeah, I hope
in this episode
he gets to do more of that.
Yeah, me too.
And part of their plan is to at first they're talking about like teleporting into like the bunker. And I think Villa says, why don't we just teleport all the way down to control? And apparently teleport can't work that deep.
Yeah, and with the density of the walls,
Yes.
and stuff. It's kind of cool. There's actual discussion. It's a short scene, but there's like some conversation and like ruling out a few things and the interaction of it. Phil is somebody else who becomes like more of a comedic character as the series goes on.
Yeah.
But like this thing with just like the guys like kind of coming up with this plan, I really like that. I like them like a semblance of teamwork,
Yes.
as opposed to just like Blake telling them what they're going to do
Right.
or something like that. That he's giving them reasons why they can do this, but it still feels like collaborative and like there's one thing when they finally decide like Phil is like, oh, okay, and he realizes this is how they've got to do it. They actually have to go there.
And Avon, he's like, well, you can't even go into that house. So they're going to have to go outside. But while they're doing this, the girl throws a gas grenade in, and they all pass out. And she comes in and steals their teleport bracelets.
Yes, and she does not take. You know what she does not take? Which
They're hair dryers.
yes, they're weapons.
Yeah.
Which
she might have not known they were weapons.
Well, yes.
These plastic sticks
Yeah. Fair enough.
with telephone cords attached. And they wake up again. He can't believe the girl did it, but the door is barred. And even at first, he can't break it down.
Mm-hmm.
And we see Travis is very confident at this point, smugly confident. Veron is disgusted with herself and gets worked up. And so Travis karate chops her.
Yes, he does. Takes her out with a well-placed
Yes.
chop. That'll always do it.
Yep. And the servant's like, I'll deal with her. And Gan finally breaks the door down. And on board, Callie's trying to contact them, and she and Jenna are both worried. And then Travis, this is where Travis starts to get off track a little bit. The mutoids want to call in backup, and he won't. I want to get Blake.
Yeah. That's not so rational, is it?
And he's like, I have to think like Blake. Where would Blake go? The Forbidden Zone. And, I mean, he's right.
Yeah.
So they're there standing outside the Forbidden Zone, and Avon thinks he can shoot the mesh again, like you said. Luckily, they have these weapons, and they'll just have to sprint across to get to the bunker. And Blake does it. Villa does it. Gan barrels in there.
Yeah, right behind them.
Yes.
Even though they got this timing worked out.
Right. He's like, I thought I better just get it over with.
Yeah.
And then Avon starts shooting it for himself, and he's running and he trips. And so he's like in between and getting ready, I guess, waiting to get exploded. But Blake fires from there, and he gets there. So, and then Villa uses his safe cracking technique, which involves dropping little cards into the lock. I'm very curious about it. I noticed later he does something to the card first, drops it into the slot.
Yeah, I like episodes where he's got a little tool bag and he has stuff. He's a craftsman.
Yes, I mean I always enjoy when he gets to be competent.
Yes, I do too. He is like a master thief, and getting in places like locked doors. That's his specialty.
Yeah,
he's very good at it.
That season 3 episode where he gets to solve a puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And stuff.
Yeah.
I thought was really good.
Yeah, that was like.
Oh, and he got a little.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a real showcase episode for him. A rare showcase episode for him.
And Travis calls Servalan on a vid screen, and he needs the zone protection taken down. And she's like, even she needs permission to do that. So she's got to call the High Council. So, like you said earlier, she's not the most powerful person. And we see the team inside the control center. A lot of climbing down ladders.
Yes, but they're clearly different rooms.
Yes,
because
they're different colors.
Yes, exactly. So you can tell.
One is white.
Yeah.
One is red, and I think one is blue.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's true.
They get to one area where there's some sort of explodey things on the floor. And so they have to do monkey bars across these pipes, conveniently placed pipes.
Yeah.
And, Gan almost falls, but they do get through.
And just barely makes it. Yeah. Yep. He's a lucky, he must be a charmed guy, I tell you.
Yes. And Servalan did get permission, but we're both at risk. And then the door opens, and she's like, "Who are you?" Who indeed? We don't know yet. And then we see Travis and the mutoids also running down hallways and climbing down ladders in hot pursuit. They finally find this door, which has the Federation logo on it, and Villa's trying to break it in. And it takes a little more work, but he does it. And they go into this big room, and Blake, he says, "We've done it once," but then
first he says, "Yeah,
I've done it.
Yeah.
I've done it."
Yeah.
And it turns out the room is completely empty.
Yeah.
And Travis comes in behind them, cackling.
Yeah. Now this was an example of that kind of thing, which was very effective.
Yes.
With Travis being there, but I love the visual was great.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's shot. You see Blake coming into the kind of towards you, and just him looking around, and his just total defeat when he realizes what's happened, sinks to his knees. This is a great scene.
Yeah, and Travis explains it that there is a control somewhere, but they've been talking up for 30 years. They've been talking about this in public and exactly where it is to trap people just like this. It's all an illusion. Even he doesn't know where the real control is. And then Servalan comes in and says, "Let them go." And it turns out, she's being held captive by none other than Jenna and the girl who have guns on her.
Yeah. Now, I love the book Liberation that I'm referencing. I love it. I don't agree with everything in there, but it does take delight in pointing out script problems in a lot of the episodes. Yeah. And this one has a lot of them, which I won't get into if you think about some of the stuff and some of the inconsistencies. But to me, for one thing, how did Jenna get here so quickly? But it almost defeats the purpose because
with all those ladders.
Yeah. from what we're seeing, and there's no indication that anybody's like, rushed to get anywhere or whatever. And it almost defeats the whole purpose with everything that all the other guys, like, he didn't say this in the book, but I was thinking, with everything they all went to, for her to just show up it just kind of really like takes away from what they've built up establishing this whole nebulous forbidden zone, which, a lot of that stuff really doesn't make sense.
I'm going to try to explain it. Here's what I'm thinking.
Right.
They were able to track Servalin's location based on the teleport bracelets being there. So that's how she teleported there.
That's how Jenna was able to track Servalan's. So that how the teleport bracelets that Viren had taken.
Yes.
Okay. And that's pretty good.
And then since everything was turned off, they could get down there without a problem.
That's pretty good. I'll buy that. I mean, I think the timing of it is still a problem.
Yes, being right there right away.
Now, that would be a good explanation. Now, I don't
think they say that.
No, they don't. I mean, and that would be
because that would ruin the surprise.
And I don't think they've done that before. If nobody's wearing the bracelet, I mean, that seems like it would be a good skill for them to have, to be able to use the bracelets essentially as homing beacons.
Yeah, I mean, there is a moment of her seeming like she's going to do something when
like
she and Callie, yeah.
I think it's and they've done this. Like, I totally buy the fact that Jenna would just do this.
Yeah,
but I just didn't buy the fact that she was able to do it so easily. Apparently easily to us.
I do think maybe the idea of having this moment be a surprise trumped it making sense.
Yes. And they did need a way out of this.
Yes.
Because they've established this like impenetrable defense and everything, and you got into this literal like room at the end of everything,
Yeah.
And like, well, how do you get out of this when you're defeated,
Right.
But either way, I love the scene, and it was really striking too. And we're kind of talking about Blake in some unflattering ways here, but I think this is probably, like, off the top of my head, this episode is really like the most blatant you see of some of these Blake tendencies.
Yeah.
And that scene of him just running in there and like being all, I mean, it was just really, really well played. Good job, Gareth Thomas.
Yeah. Well, and I think some of those unflattering things make him more interesting.
Oh yeah,
if he were just a standard hero.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the stuff like Avon says about him doesn't always come out in his actions.
Yeah.
Like he's not as purely idealistic, and he does a lot of like moral compromises, and he can be pretty callous towards life in some ways. And it's like the Liberation book. One thing that's interesting is it keeps referring to them throughout the narrative, like the Blake 7 crew, as terrorists, which, it's a little off-putting to me at first, because it's like the series establishes who they're going against, but technically, he's right.
I mean,
that's what they are, but it's a curious choice to keep referring to them as terrorists throughout the thing, and like referring to what they do as terrorist attacks.
Right. Yeah.
But, it is, but it's not really...
You want to use something more flattering.
Yeah. Because you sort of sympathize with
resistance.
But there are some scenes where Blake makes very questionable choices, and some of the way they value life and some of the moral decisions they make can be argued for sure.
Yeah, but Travis doesn't want to give in at first. He finally does, because they have guns.
Yeah.
And so they head off, and he sends the mutoids after them, and then Servalan slaps him.
Yeah.
You hesitated. And I believe the next episode deals with some of the fallout from this.
Yeah.
One, right?
I think they do reference,
Travis ends up getting kicked out of the Space Command.
Oh, that's right, because they have like the trial.
Yeah.
The trial of Travis.
Yes.
Of Space Commander Travis. Right, so everybody else still has to leave the...
throw something?
Yes, there's like a grenade.
That's right, he throws this grenade. That's very important.
And she like thinks it's like a foolish move.
Yes.
Because she doesn't, because you'll bring down the whole building.
Right.
Usually it's not a good idea to throw a grenade in an enclosed space.
No. And, this is a sliding door starts to come down, and Gan holds it up for everyone else to get through. And Blake is the last one through except for him. And then the door falls and crushes Gan's leg. And then more debris falls, and Blake survives, but as we've been foreshadowing in an ironic fashion.
Yes.
Poor Gan doesn't.
Yes.
Which when I was watching it, I was shocked. A little bit shocked. Just in not having read anything, and just like, whoa.
Yeah, unfortunately, I knew that that this was his last episode.
Yeah.
Which actually made some of the earlier, the near misses kind of amusing, knowing that something was going to happen because I was expecting it. But but it must have been something at the time. I don't think there would have been any reason for anybody to expect this to happen.
No.
Like have a core member.
It's just it's not the kind of thing that was done back then.
No.
At least not American TV. Probably not British TV.
No. I'm sure it was very, very shocking.
Yeah. And, I think someone in the oral history said something like, well, it's a shame they finally figured out what to do with this character. In the episode he died.
Yeah.
But it's pretty much accurate.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean,
He had that one other like a spotlight episode about his chip and stuff.
yeah, which was kind of like the dark side of him,
Yeah,
where he says he's got these like violent tendencies. In that case, it was because the chip, I guess, was malfunctioning.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought he was good, like, kind of having the brawn here. But I was sorry to see him go.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
And give them credit. It comes up and continues to come up at least in the rest of the season. And it kind of one point Blake isolates himself on a planet to deal with it.
Yeah,
feeling guilty.
Well, if you look at it, I mean, he lost a crew member for nothing, and it ultimately turned out to be this empty chase and almost killed all of them.
Yeah, and yet later in the season he pursues the exact same thing.
Yes. Yes. Well, he's a fanatic.
Yes. And Travis, Servalin, and the Mutoids are for the moment stuck.
Yeah.
And Travis they'll dig us out eventually. Servalin, eventually.
Yeah. And then I'll bury you.
Yes.
And she does give a little sachet to that line, doesn't she? But
I don't know where she's going.
Yeah, that's right. Because she does literally walks off camera.
I guess she's going back to the computer room, the empty computer room, to sulk.
Yeah.
And they offer to take Veron because, of course, they have all their teleport bracelets back in Jenna's purse. And then they leave, and Blake tells Zen to standard by 10, and then gives them vague instructions and questions that.
Yeah. It's like, command is unclear.
Yes.
It's like, just do it.
Confirmed. And then he looks back at an empty chair that I guess was, Gans, because there are all these. There's a chair for each team member.
Yeah.
To operate the ship that they don't need to operate.
Yes.
And then credits and the great theme song, which we haven't mentioned.
Yes, Dudley Simpson.
Dudley Simpson.
Dudley Simpson Orchestra. I love the theme music.
Yeah.
It's like inspiring and majestic.
It is. And the opening credits, especially in the first two seasons, are awesome.
Yes.
It opened with this weird sort of pixel animation of
Yeah.
Blake's face, and then there's completely animated version of the ship flying through. It looks like, I don't know, Monty Python animation or something. And that theme song, and then the third season ones are okay. Right?
Yeah.
The fourth season are terrible.
The fourth season's rubbish.
Yeah.
The first two are inspired. The third is slightly, it changes a little bit, for out of necessity a little bit. The fourth season, and you think there's some kind of reason for it, but there really isn't much of a reason for what they do in the fourth season. I really don't get that.
Yeah.
And they also tinker with the end music. There's a little bit of a different version of the song, I think, over the credits in the fourth season. I don't know why they did that, but
yeah.
But yeah, the classic Blake 7 theme song.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
It is. And that's the episode, though.
Yeah, it's good. And I like how they handled Gan's death. They gave him a heroic death.
Yes.
They had some reflection at the end as opposed to just, leaving it there. So it's a good episode. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I enjoyed rewatching it because I had been a while since I'd seen this one. So it's good to see the old crew.
Yeah,
that's spent more time recently with the newer versions.
That's what I said to Lori, and I said, as much as I grew to appreciate what the show became, it was a lot of fun revisiting this crew. But I will say that when we first started talking about episodes, my first reaction was, while I was still making my way through the series, was, well, we got to do one from the first two series.
Yeah.
Then I said, you know what, third series would be okay too. And even the fourth series, like I said, it starts out kind of weird and has the single worst episode of the series, I think. As soon as we watched it, we were like, "Oh, that was terrible." Okay. And after that, though, it picked up, leading to a spectacular finale. But my point is, I liked they make some drastic changes, and I was very skeptical. I was like, "Really, we're halfway through the show, and they're already doing these big changes?" But I thought the third season turned out to be really cool, and a lot of the fourth season was too. I like the show maybe just as much.
They're very different each time because every season ends with a legit cliffhanger.
Yeah,
I don't know that the resolution of the first season one is that.
No, it's
kind of it's
almost like an old cliffhanger.
It was a dream, yeah.
Like an old it's almost like kind of when the old serials where they'd have the cliffhangers and it would wind up being kind of a letdown.
Yeah.
When you come back and you see how they get out of this, and it's like, oh well.
They are endings they could either be the end, or could then be a problem they solve next season. And so season 2 especially ends in really game changing.
Yes.
And season 3 does too, in a lesser extent, but
like a ton of stuff happens off camera in between 2 and 3.
Yeah.
And big changes
and not just changes to the cast and the main characters' lives, but the whole sort of landscape.
Right. Right. I think I like some of the characters that we see later on. I like as much as the first two, and I think they kind of improved there. Story wise, though, like towards the end of the series, I wasn't as impressed. And like one thing that I think hurts the series is there's more focus, like in the first couple seasons, and in the fourth season, like what they're doing, their goals aren't really clear, and it seems to like go back and forth. It's like, well, all of a sudden this is their goal or something, and now they go this like, where did this come from? And again, it's stuff happening off camera, I guess.
Yes.
But it's like, well, it's a little weird, like, and sometimes you don't know whether they're, for a while there's like some ambiguity whether, okay, are they just like pirates, or are they like, rebels still, or they're more committed than ever to defeating the Federation. So it gets, but hey, the whole series is worth watching.
And I think that fourth season there, I mean, that finale episode, and there's an episode where Villa thinks Avon's going to kill him. Yeah. Which was really effective.
Yes.
And just, I think Michael Keating, the Villa actor, is especially good in that.
Yeah, and they sort of make a reference to it, like maybe the very next episode.
Yeah.
Again, these are the kind of things that, like, really, under different circumstances, they really could have tied a lot of this stuff together and had even more continuity, which would have really impressed it. But there's still, there's a good amount of continuity. But I would have liked to have seen them being able to maybe make some more direct connections to some of this stuff we've seen. Like, there's a couple of big events, like I won't get into, that they kind of just like are really interesting, and then they just really don't touch on them at all.
Yeah.
Or maybe just fleetingly, which they could have done a lot more with. But, they only had 13 episodes a season.
That's right,
too.
yeah. And season 3 has multiple rare dual roles.
There's a contradiction in terms
of... Yes.
Yes, you were spot on with that. Yes. Yeah. Well put. I mean, we've talked a lot about this and covered it a lot, but there's so much more to this series, and there's so many like memorable episodes, and I'm really glad. I'm glad that you suggested this.
Yeah, I'm glad I watched it.
Yeah.
On a whim. Let me get my money's worth out of BritBox. Whim.
Well, we've got our money's worth out of BritBox, and I'm glad, because I think that's pretty much all we've been watching on BritBox for the last couple of months. But
it's most of what I watched for a while too.
Yeah. But good stuff. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, that's our look at Blake 7. Join us again next time. Maybe we'll look at another 7. I don't know.
Maybe.
I don't know. I don't remember what order we.
Where's our continuity?
Yes.
If we had a strong showrunner here,
right,
we might avoid these kind of things, Mike.
Yes, and we should mention you've got, there's not a lot of merch out there, unfortunately, but you've got, looks like a couple novelizations here.
Yes, these are from...
Unfortunately, they have the season 4 logo on them. But.
Yes, my beloved Lori got these for me, and I've been avoiding diving into these because I wanted to watch get through the whole series first. Yeah. I'm not sure where. I think they fit into different.
I mean, one says their first adventure.
Yeah, so I think some of these like are at different points, but most of them probably around before this episode. I know some of them are,
and one of them is some sort of guide, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Fully illustrated.
Yes. Yeah, this is cool stuff, and there was like a corgi liberator apparently, which boy, I'd love to have that.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to find, especially stateside.
Maybe this Blu-ray release will create interest in creating new merch.
Yes, it's a very toyetic show, isn't it?
Yes.
Isn't it?
I mean, an Orak?
Yes.
Who wouldn't want one? That came up in the oral history for the wrap party of the 4th season. All the directors, they had a big party. I guess they knew it might be the end, and the producer tried to get as many people who had been worked on the show for the entire run at this party, and a lot of people, the directors and maybe some other people, got little tiny mini Oraks. Because the woman who directed a lot of the episodes, mentioning this, and she directed the finale, brought it up because she went to the special effects people to see what was holding up getting some stuff made, and they were busy doing something for the producer, which turned out to be these things.
That's a great use of time, I
think.
Oh, boy, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Yes, and thank you to, Lori today, in honor of this podcast, is wearing her Blake 7 shirt with her guy, Avon.
Yes.
Which you got her. Very nice.
That's right.
Proud wearer of that, yeah.
And a sticker. It came with a sticker. Or no, the sticker was a separate thing. Sticker of Avon and Orak and Zen.
What a team. What a team. Yes, Blake 7, the 7... composition of the 7 may have changed, but a great crew all the way through, I think. This episode brought to you by Zen's Travel Agency. Your destination is confirmed. This episode also brought to you by Servaland's Supreme Fashion Boutique, the only store in the galaxy willing to sell white clothes after Space Labor Day. This episode also brought to you by Blake's Flakes, made from a blend of 7 grains. Blake's Flakes give you standard by 10 energy. Join us next time for another exciting episode of Battle of the Network Shows. Learn more, leave feedback, and suggest future episodes at battleofthenetworkshows.com. Follow us on Twitter at BatNetShows, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Battle of the Network Shows.